What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another MRL format video. And in this video, I'm going to show off some games that I think show off both the best and worst aspects of this format. Now, if you missed my guide from yesterday, MRL format is the new format that I'm exploring. And it's basically the format whose card pool goes up to Magic Ruler, but uses the Critter format limited list. So this format is very unique as it has all of the quote-unquote hand-rip cards, that is Delinquent Duo, Confiscation, and Forceful Sentry, available to play at 3 copies each, which makes it a very, very swingy format, but that can be very, very fun as well. So hopefully that will show through in the games today. But before we dive in to the deck that I'm playing and the games that I played, if you're not already subscribed to my channel, please be sure to do so. I've got a lot of cool videos on the way covering MRL format, and then after I'm done with covering MRL format, we'll be moving on to the next format where they actually introduce the limited list to curb the power of these cards. So that should be very fun as well, even though I haven't quite started exploring it as much as I have MRL format yet. If you want to help me explore these formats and also play a ton of awesome games with a ton of awesome people, we now have a Discord server that you can join. Link will be down in the description below. It's a really awesome place to just test out these really cool formats and also to play any of the previous formats that I've covered in these videos if you're interested. So really cool place. Hope to see you there. And of course, lastly, as always, if you enjoy this video, please be sure to leave a like down below. It really helps out. But now that we've gotten that all of the way, let's dive in to this deck. Now, this deck is what I like to call just a generic cookie cutter deck in this format. Basically, you throw just a bunch of the good cards together and put it into this pile of a deck. We're playing 42 cards because I didn't know quite what to cut from this list. I think maybe in the future you could slim it down to 40 just to increase the chances of drawing a hand rip card in your first turn hand. But, you know, I think that it's fine at 42. It doesn't change things too much, so that's why I've got it at 42 here. But, you know, this format is very, very under-optimized, and there are a lot of improvements that can be made to this deck and other decks that I'm going to show off in the future. And we're trying to sort of explore it more and refine these things more. So, you know, these decks are going to be somewhat rough in many cases. But I think that even though this deck is somewhat rough, I think that it is very good and it is sort of a cohesive whole. And, you know, I think it is probably one of the best sorts of decks in the format. Just these generic cookie cutter good stuff decks are just super powerful because there are so many just generic good stuff cards. So I think a deck playing them like this is probably a candidate for tier 0 in the format, although it's unclear at this point in my opinion. So let's go through the card by card and explain what each card is doing in this deck. We've of course got a Cannon Soldier, as this is a great search off of Sangan or Witch and can just end the game out of nowhere. It can also be found off of Mystic Tomato, a recruiter that we're playing 3 of that's a new inclusion in Magic Ruler and is very, very strong. Mystic Tomato can fetch both Cannon Soldier, as I mentioned, and any of the recruiters that you have, as well as another Mystic Tomato. Its stats also line up very well, as you can crash it into an opponent's Cannon Soldier, get out another Mystic Tomato or a recruiter, and attack in again. Moving on to the flip monsters, we have 2 Cyberjar. Now, Cyberjar is a bit of a controversial card in this format. Some people really like it, some people really hate it. It's a very swingy card, as it does destroy every card in the field and then draw 5 cards for each player, which can really help your opponent recover if they're in a bad position. But I like it in the deck as it can really help you recover as well if you're in a bad position. And while there are cases where this turns out to be majorly beneficial for your opponent and majorly detrimental to you, I think it's a threatening enough card that you should play it in your deck. Maybe not at 2 copies like I have it here. Maybe you could cut it down to 1, and that would be a way to slim down the deck a bit more. But I like it at 2, just to have it on hand when you need it. We also have 3 Magician of Faith, as there are so many powerful spells in this format. We're playing 22 spells in this deck alone, that I think having 3 of this card can be very, very good and very, very powerful, just to get back any of the powerful spells that you're using. We have the 2 Witch and the 2 Sangan, as I mentioned. These can search out pretty much anything that you'd want in the deck. And we also have 3 Mechanical Chaser as our beater of choice. This is the level 4 monster in the format with the highest amount of attack without any sort of downside for attacking. Moving on to the spells, we of course have the Power 5 limited spells, Change of Heart, Dark Hole, Monster Reborn, Pot of Greed, and Raigeki. all incredibly strong, especially in a deck like this. For our hand rip cards, we have 3 Delinquent Duo and 3 Forceful Sentry. Now you might be wondering why we aren't playing 3 Confiscation as well, and the reason for this is that the hand rip cards can brick later on in the game, so you don't necessarily want to play all 9, and if we were playing 3 Confiscation as well, then we'd basically have 6 cards that all require us to pay a cost of 1,000 life points, which adds up to 6,000 points total, which is a bit of an ask in a deck like this. So we're choosing just to go with the 3 Duo and the 3 Forceful, and this is a common choice among many decks in the format, because Duo lets you discard 2 cards from your opponent's hand, so it is a +1 in most cases, unless your opponent has an Electric Snake in hand, and Forceful lets you look at your opponent's hand to get the hand knowledge, and also put a card back in deck without having to pay any life points for it, which can actually come up. You know, oftentimes you want to get rid of a powerful spell card, but your opponent's probably also playing a ton of Magician of Faith to be able to get it back. So putting it back in deck can make it a bit less accessible than it would be in the graveyard, which is kind of counterintuitive, but makes Forceful a bit better than Confiscation in my opinion. For our other spells, we of course have 3 Fissure to act as even more monster removal. We have 2 Heavy Storm and 3 Mystical Space Typhoon to act as a ton of spell and trap removal. Mystical Space Typhoon especially is a very powerful card in this format, as you can actually activate it the turn that it's set. So if your opponent tries to Mystical Space Typhoon a set Mystical Space Typhoon that you set that turn, you can actually chain it and pop another of their back row, which can be very nice. This card is also great as stopping the last spell in our deck, Snatch Steal, which is basically like Change of Heart, but it has to be on a face-up monster. This card can be very good at enabling very aggressive pushes, and is just very powerful at 3 copies, so that's why we're playing 3. For the trap lineup, we have 1 Mirror Force and 3 Waboku. I do think that Waboku is necessary in a deck like this, as there can be very explosive aggressive plays in this format, so you want to have a way to stop them. That's also chainable to something like a Heavy Storm, or a Giant Trunade, or a Mystical Space Typhoon. And of course, Mirror Force is just an incredibly powerful card if you're able to resolve it. Yes, there is more spell and trap removal in this format, but I think you still got to play Mirror Force just in case. Moving on to the side deck, we have 3 Jirai Gumo so that we can get more aggressive. We have 3 Manure Bug in case we need more removal. We have 3 Giant Trunade in case we need more spell and trap removal. There are a lot of stallier decks in this format that use Floodgates and other things like that, and Giant Trunade can be great at putting a stop to that. We have 3 Tailor of the Fickle if we're facing an equipped deck, which do exist in this format. It's a good aggressive option, and Tailor of the Fickle can really put a damper on their plans. We also have 3 Tribute to the Doomed, as Tribute to the Doomed can enable us to stop more stallier decks that are playing a bunch of flip monsters, things like Spear Cretin or Cyberjar. Tribute to the Doomed can be very good in that scenario, as we'll likely have more cards in hand because we're playing a much slower match. But that's going to do it for the deck breakdown here. You should probably have a Fusion deck as well, just to bluff that you might be on Fusion, but it's not really necessary. Fusion in this format is really bad, which is a sad contrast to how it was in the previous format, TP1 format, or as we're calling it in the Discord now, Mecha format. So I don't really think a Fusion deck is necessary, but you might as well have one. Doesn't cost you anything to put in, and it can potentially play a little bit of mind games with your opponent. But now that I've covered the deck breakdown, let's dive into some games. Okay, we've got a game against Ellie Tincan, a regular guest on this channel, and one of the people who has been innovating on this format in the Discord. So always happy to have them on. It'll be exciting to see what they're playing. We are playing the sort of generic good stuff deck that I just showed you. So let's see how it goes. We're going to start off with the most important play of the game, arguably, rock, paper, scissors. And it's one of the most important plays in the game, as because whoever goes first is very much advantaged, as drawing hand rips early can be very powerful in the first turn, just enabling you to put a stop to anything that your opponent might do on the next turn. So let's hope we draw a hand rip card in our opening hand. And we do. We draw Forceful Sentry, which is pretty great. This will give us an idea of what we have to play around from our opponent. So we are just going to activate Forceful Sentry right away and look at what they've got. Looks like they've got a hand of Snatch Steal, Forceful Sentry, Cannon Soldier, Confiscation, and Dark Hole. Now, if we removed one of the hand rip cards, they'd still have one left. So I don't really think it's worth taking one of those. In addition, we've got the Mystical Space Typhoon for the Snatch Steal, and Cannon Soldier isn't that much of a threat, as we can just crash a Mystic Tomato into it. So I honestly think the pick here is Dark Hole. And then we can play around the hand rips by setting our hand, as they don't really have a heavy storm. And, you know, there are only 2 heavy storms in the deck likely. So I think that we're probably safe setting here. So we are going to take the Dark Hole and put it back on top of their deck. So they'll shuffle it. There they go. And we just got to hope that they don't draw heavy, but it's a 1 out of 18 chance, so it's not very likely. So let's see what happens here. They do draw heavy, so, you know, we do get pretty punished for this play. But I think we kind of had to do it, and we do have the Waboku to chain to it. It's just we do lose out on our Snatch Steal and Mystical Space Typhoon, so a bit rough in that regard, but at least we can protect our Mystic Tomato here. They are going to just Confiscation the last remaining card in our hand, flip up our set monster. Oh, that shouldn't have happened, because we did have Waboku chained. Not really sure why that happened. I mean, that benefits us, I guess, because, you know, they could have just Snatch Stealed the Mystic Tomato. Yeah, I don't know. This was a mistake on our part, I think. So it just happened, but doesn't make a difference overall, I don't think. We draw Monster Reborn, so we're going to activate the Reborn, bring back the Mystic Tomato. Mystic Tomato can crash into their Cannon Soldier and bring out another monster from deck. Now, we know that they have a Snatch Steal and a Forceful Sentry set, so we don't necessarily want to bring out a monster that can get over Witch, as they can just Snatch Steal that, and have a Beater on their side of the field, as they can just Forceful back whatever we search with Witch. So we're actually going to bring out another Witch instead, and we're just going to attack in for 22 here. And we're just going to pass back to them. They're going to bring out Mechanical Chaser. It's going to attack into the Witch. We will get a search here, but that will likely get Forceful Sentry'd back, and it does indeed. They are now going to activate Snatch Steal, just so we won't be able to crash our Witch into Mechanical Chaser and get another monster. I think this makes sense, even though we will be gaining 1,000 life points in our standby phase. So that will hopefully stem the bleeding a little bit from this. We're going to set a Waboku, pass back to them. They're going to attack in with everything. That's 2950, kind of a lot to take, but we do gain back 1,000 here, so it makes it a little bit more tolerable. We draw Mirror Force, so we're going to set that as well. If they do want to heavy this board away, then we get the Witch back, so it's not the worst thing in the world. And we can also chain Waboku as well. They're going to attack in for 2950 here, and we do actually activate Mirror Force at this point. We want to get the search off of the Witch to potentially get a monster and get back into this game. So we do search out a Mechanical Chaser. We do have Waboku, so, you know, if they bring out a Mechanical Chaser of their own, we can crash and use Waboku to protect our Mechanical Chaser. They're going to Forceful that back into our deck, and we draw a Fisher, which isn't quite useful for us here. We're going to keep Fisher in hand to potentially bait another hand rip, but let's see what they do here. They're just going to bring out a Mass Sorcerer, and I think given how low on resources each of us are, we actually do want to Waboku this, as, you know, we don't necessarily want them getting more card advantage, because in a simplified game state like this, card advantage can matter a whole lot. And I think this sort of simplified game state can show some of the appeal of this format. Oftentimes, due to the hand rip spells, you get down to these game states where each player has very, very low resources, and that basically turns it into a big top deck war, which can be very exciting. And I actually really enjoy when the game is at this state, as it makes each card count even more, and it makes each decision you make very, very important. So it's not for everyone, I know, but I do enjoy this aspect of the format quite a bit. We are just going to Fisher away that Mass Sorcerer, set a Heavy Storm, pass back to them. They're going to bring out a Mechanical Chaser, and they will be able to attack in here for 1850. Kind of unfortunate, but let's see what we draw. We draw Magician of Faith. We're just going to set that. If they do have Change of Heart, that's really rough. I think we actually would probably lose the game in that case, but if they don't, I think we're fine. They will Mystical Space Typhoon our Heavy Storm. We will Magician of Faith, and we got to think about what to get back here. We could get back like a Monster Reborn to potentially bring out a Mystic Tomato and crash and get something. We could also bring out their Mechanical Chaser and crash that way. So Monster Reborn might be the better pick here, but it looks like we're just going to grab a Fisher just to make sure that we can clear that Mechanical Chaser, even if they've got like a Waboku or something. But it looks like they've got a Delinquent Duo, so they're just going to activate that, get the Fisher out of our hand to protect the Mechanical Chaser. We draw another Fisher, so we will be able to clear that Mechanical Chaser there and pass back to them. They're just going to set one. We draw Heavy Storm. We could activate that now, but I think we can hopefully save it and get more value off of it. If they do have a Mystical Space Typhoon and they pop our Heavy Storm in the end phase, that's basically the same thing as if we had activated it, so we're not too worried about that. They're going to draw, summon out a Sandgant, and attack in. That's kind of unfortunate for us. We'll take 1,000. And we draw a Forceful Sentry, which is not the most useful here as they have no cards in hand. Forceful Sentry will potentially become useful if we're actually able to get over their Sandgan. We can then Forceful Sentry away whatever they search off of it. So we'll save it for that. And we're keeping it in hand. This does bait their hand removal if they've got any left. And also it plays better with our Heavy Storm, as we don't necessarily want to activate a preemptive Heavy Storm and lose our Forceful Sentry. They're just going to attack him with the Sandgan yet again, whittling us down even further. And main 2, they're just going to set one, pass back to us. We draw Pot of Greed, which is insanely good. We're going to Heavy Storm to make sure if they do have like a counter trap or something, they won't be able to activate it on our Pot of Greed. And we do clear 2 of their background. We cleared their Raigeki, which is very, very nice on our part. We draw Magician of Faith and Change of Heart. That won't quite get us there, but, you know, it's not the worst thing in the world. We're going to set the Magician of Faith and set the Forceful Sentry and pass back to them. This plays around if they've got Heavy. I mean, there's only one Heavy in the deck, so maybe we should have played around a Hand Rip instead, as there are likely at least 2 Hand Rips left in the deck. But we play this play, and we feel okay about it. Let's see what they do. They're going to attack in to our set Magician of Faith. We grab back a Monster Reborn, and we get majorly punished for trying to play around Heavy and not a Hand Rip. We lose both of the cards that we kept in hand, and those are 2 very, very powerful ones that could have potentially won us the game here. But we'll have to see if it ends up mattering. We draw another Hand Rip, and this is getting back to something I said in the deck profile. You know, the Hand Rips can brick late game. We just have 2 Hand Rips. Our opponent has no hand, so they're not really that useful here. They're going to attack in for another 1,000. We're in very dire straits here. And they're just going to set one, pass back to us. We draw Mechanical Chaser. And if we'd actually set the Change of Heart earlier to play around the Hand Rips, we actually might have been fine here because we could have summoned Mechanical Chaser, Change of Hearted their Sandgan, and gone in for game. But unfortunately, we didn't, so we will just have to attack into their Sandgan. They'll search out another Sandgan. We can use Forceful Sentry to shuffle that back in, and hopefully they don't have a way to kill us here. Let's find out. They are going to activate the Snatch Steal that they have set, and that will be the end of the game. So I think if we had played that a little bit differently, playing around the Hand Rips instead of the Heavy, we actually could have won that game. And I think that goes to show how every decision that you make in these sort of simplified game states that you can wind up in this format can matter immensely. And it can make some of these games very, very intense, which I really enjoy. Let's see how game 2 goes, though. I think that we keep the deck the same. We don't side out on the Hand Rips because we're still going first and we want to draw into those Hand Rips. Unfortunately, we don't draw any in the opener. So we're just going to play Mechanical Chaser, set a Heavy and a Fisher. What we're trying to do here is kind of do the best of both worlds. We're hoping that they only have one of a Hand Rip or a Heavy. So if they Heavy Storm our board away and don't have a Hand Rip, then we're still doing fine. If they Hand Rip and don't Heavy, then we're still doing fine. So we're trying to play around that a little bit. And we figured that since they've only got 2 Heavies, but they've got at least 6 Hand Rips, it's good to sort of hedge our bets in this way. Unfortunately, we do get a little bit punished for this here. They do Delinquent Duo, so we will lose 2 cards in hand. We're going to discard the Snatch Steal and discard the Heavy. We've got Magician of Faith in hand, so we can get back one of those spells if we want it. They're going to Heavy Storm here, so we lose these spells that we set. And unfortunately, they do have a Forceful as their last card. So now we're down to 1 Mechanical Chaser. Kind of rough this early in the game. They're going to set one, pass back to us. We draw another Mechanical Chaser, so we're just going to go for it. If that is a Cyber Jar, then at least we replenish our field in hand, hopefully. So we're not too worried about going all in here. But unfortunately for us, it's not a Cyber Jar. It's actually a Man-Eater Bug. So that will pop one of our Mechanical Chasers. Luckily, we still have one left. But let's see what they do here. They're going to Dark Hole away the remaining one, bring out a Mass Sorcerer, and just get even more advantage on us. And this shows how powerful Mass Sorcerer can be in this format. I'm not sure it's necessarily a card you should include in every deck, but it may be a potential one-of to include in this sort of generic cookie-cutter deck in the future. They're just going to set one, pass back to us. We draw a Witch of the Black Forest. Now, we could summon out the Witch and attack into their Mass Sorcerer, but if they've got a Waboku set and then a way to clear the face-up Witch next turn, then that can be pretty bad for us. So what we're actually going to do is set the Witch here. If they bring out a monster to attack over the Witch and then attack him with Mass Sorcerer, then we get pretty punished for this. But we're trying to play around things like Snatch Steal and Fisher and the like. So hopefully this Witch will be able to defend us against the Mass Sorcerer. They're going to draw. They're just going to switch the Mass Sorcerer defense, set another pass back to us. We feel pretty good about that. We draw a Fisher, so we're just going to flip up the Witch, attack into their set. If it's a Man-Eater bug like we expect, then we will be able to get a search here. Unfortunately for us, it is a Sandgan, so they'll be able to grab a Mystic Tomato, which does deal with our Witch. We will activate Fisher to clear the Mass Sorcerer, as they will be able to get a draw here next turn. And we're just going to pass back to them. We'll at least get a search off the Witch after they attack into it with the Tomato. So we're not in the worst traits here. We're going to take 3. Think about what to search. We could just search a Beater, but we're actually going to search Cyberjar instead, as we really do need to replenish our hand after those hand rips. Unfortunately for us, our opponent does have another Forceful, so that will shuffle the Cyberjar back, and we're back to just top decking. We draw a Snatch Steal, which is a decent draw. We're going to try and Snatch Steal the Mystic Tomato to get in some damage here. They are going to Mystical Space Typhoon the Snatch Steal, so we'll just pass back to them. And they are going to just attack in with the Tomato, which makes sense. They don't really need to commit more to board. That Tomato is already threatening enough. They're going to set one, which is very likely a Magician of Faith, as if it wasn't, they probably would have just summoned it out to attack. So we're just going to set our Magician of Faith as really the only thing we could do here. If they've got a Magician of Faith, you know, they can just get back Dark Hole to clear our Magician of Faith, but then that clears away their Tomato, so we're not too torn up about that. But if we kept the Magician of Faith in hand, then they could have just gotten back like a Forceful Sentry and gotten rid of it that way. So I think we have to actually commit the Faith to board here, even though it's not ideal. And they are going to flip up Magician of Faith here, grab back the Dark Hole, and they will just Dark Hole the board away. We'll lose our Magician of Faith, and they're just going to set another card, probably a Magician of Faith again. And we're in very bad straits here. We could Delinquent Duo, the last remaining card in their hand, but they can just Magician of Faith back a spell card if that is indeed Magician of Faith. So I think what we want to do is actually set the Delinquent Duo and bait them into getting back a Mystical Space Typhoon, and that is indeed what we're going to do. Maybe this was a bit of a mistake, but we're really on the back foot here, so we need to make sure that they don't get a powerful spell off of this Faith. They're going to grab back the Mystical Space Typhoon, and they will be able to clear our Delinquent Duo. Attack in for 300. That's pretty good. It means they probably don't have much more aggressive pressure here. We draw a Dark Hole. No real need to activate it yet. We're just going to set it, pass back to them. They're going to attack in for another 300. Looks like they're not drawing any other monsters. They're just going to set one, pass back to us. We're going to set the Mystical Space Typhoon. No reason to activate it now. And pass back to them. They're just going to attack in for another 300. That is fine by us. And we draw a Forceful Sentry, so honestly, we should probably activate it here just to see what our opponent's working with. Even though it's likely they don't have any monsters in hand, they might have very powerful spell cards that can come back to bite us if we do commit a monster to board. So we check their hand, and they've got 2 hand rips, Delinquent Duo and Forceful Sentry, and a Snatch Steal. So Snatch Steal is really the only threat here, as we can play around the Forceful Sentry and the Delinquent Duo by just committing our cards to board. So we're going to send the Snatch back into the deck, and then hopefully they just don't draw any more monsters. If they do draw a monster, then we can Dark Hole the board away at least, but unfortunately they draw a Witch, which isn't really worth Dark Holing, as then they'll get a search off that anyways. So not the best. We just need any monster. Any monster would probably help us out in this situation, but we do not draw a monster, so we're just going to set a Mystical Space Typhoon. And they're just going to attack in for 1400 again. This is very rough for us. We're in a very dire strait here. We're just going to try Mystical Space Typhoon in their back row, as we really need to, if we draw a monster, stick it to board and attack into their stuff. If it's a Mystical Space Typhoon of their own, then they're likely going to snipe the second most recent back row that we have set, instead of the first one that we have set, as we have had the first set on field for longer, so it likely is less useful than the second set, but unclear. This is a bit of a risk. Luckily, the risk does pay off. They just snipe our second Mystical Space Typhoon. We draw a Waboku, so we'll just set the Waboku, Dark Hole their board away, just because we don't necessarily want to Waboku a 1400 attack here. and we want to get them searching another monster, as if we draw some other removal and we clear their board after Wubokuing, then we'll be at their mercy. So we do want to go for this. They will search out a Mechanical Chaser, and let's see what they do. They're going to bring out a Cannon Soldier, which is pretty rough for us. We will have to Wuboku this, as if we don't, they can just tribute off the Cannon Soldier main phase 2 and kill us that way. So we just got to hope we get a good draw here, which is an okay draw, but it does just lose to the Mechanical Chaser they have in hand. So let's just hope they don't summon out the Mechanical Chaser and attack in. Maybe they're worried that it's a Cyber Jar or something. Unfortunately, they do go for it, and that will be the end of the game as we're not playing Karibos. So I hope these games showed how you often wind up in these very, very low resource situations, which can be both very fun and very frustrating, as in the second game here, all we needed was a monster, and we'd be pretty set. Unfortunately, we never drew a monster that would actually do anything to combat their Magician of Faith. So kind of unfortunate in that regard, but that can happen in these games. I do have one more match to show you against LA Tin Can, with us both on these same decks, as we did do a rematch after this, and I think that game also illustrates some of the both strengths and flaws of this format. So let's dive into those. So we've got match 2 against LA Tin Can here. We went into this immediately after the first one, so we are both on the same generic good stuff decks that we were on. So, you know, this will just be a rematch of the mirror match, which I think is honestly fine. This mirror match is probably what you're likely to see at the top levels of play in this format, so it's good to get as many games of it as possible on the record here. So, we will be going first here. And we do draw a Forceful Sentry, so that is very nice. We'll be able to look at their hand, sort of play around what they've got. Although, as shown in the first match, that isn't always foolproof. But let's see what they've got. They've got a Mechanical Chaser, Delinquent Duo, Wuboku, Witch of the Black Forest, and a Mystical Space Typhoon. This is a bit of a tricky one to play around. I think we can play around Mystical Space Typhoon just by setting the Wuboku first turn. If they want to just use up the Mystical Space Typhoon because we know about it, we can just chain the Wuboku, still get some value that way. I think the hardest card to actually play around here is Delinquent Duo, as we don't necessarily want to set our whole hand, because that plays into the Mystical Space Typhoon or a top-decked heavy. So I think that we actually want to get rid of the Delinquent Duo here. We can deal with the Mechanical Chaser with the Mirror Force or the Dark Hole, and which we can just deal with Cannon Soldier or Witch of the Black Forest. So we are just going to get rid of the Duo here, and they're going to add that back to deck, shuffle it up. And we're just going to set a Witch, set a Wuboku, pass back to them. If they do activate the Mystical Space Typhoon here, we can just chain the Wuboku to it. So not the worst thing in the world. We are going to chain the Wuboku there. They're just going to set one of their own, set another, pass back to us. We draw a Snatch Steal, which is pretty nice. We're going to bring out a Cannon Soldier, as we do have the hunch that that likely is the Witch that they set before. And we are going to attack in. It is indeed the Witch. They're going to add a Mass Sorcerer to hand, which is a little bit worrying, but not the worst thing in the world. We're going to attack in with the Witch of the Black Forest, set a Mirror Force, pass back to them, and they're going to activate a Snatch Steal. So it looks like they probably drew that last turn, as they wouldn't have searched the Mass Sorcerer otherwise. They're going to bring out a Mass Sorcerer, try attacking in here. We will Mirror Force this, as we don't want them getting more resources with the Mass Sorcerer. We do lose our own Cannon Soldier, which is kind of rough, but it's not the worst thing in the world. Cyber Jar is a good card for later if they do manage to claw their way back and get us down to lower resources, but we don't really need to commit it to board yet. We're going to set the Snatch Deal, as if they do have a Mystical Space Typhoon and use it on this, that will be unfortunate, but this was probably going to be on the receiving end of a Mystical Space Typhoon anyways, and I do think that the Change of Heart and Dark Hole in our hand are a bit stronger. So they're going to bring out the Mechanical Chaser here and attack into our Witch. That's perfectly fine. We are just going to search out another Mystic Tomato here. That way, you know, if they attack into it, then we can bring out another Mystic Tomato. So I like that play. We are just going to go into draw phase. We draw a Mystical Space Typhoon, and we are actually going to try and play around with Wuboku here. We're going to set the Mystical Space Typhoon, so that way next turn we can make a majorly aggressive push by Mystical Space Typhooning their back row, which is presumably Wuboku, and then getting in for a ton of damage with our Snatch Steal. So we could get punished if they did set a Mystical Space Typhoon, but I feel pretty confident in this play. we're just going to bring out another Mystic Tomato so we can keep going as aggressive as possible. Maybe we should have brought out a Witch or Sangan here instead, as, if they've got a Fisher or something, then this plays around that a little bit. But I feel fine doing this. They're going to Forceful Sentry, and they will take the Dark Hole, which is a little bit unfortunate for us, but honestly not the worst, as we can get majorly aggressive here, so we're not too concerned about that. In the end phase, we are going to just Mystical Space Typhoon their back row, and it is indeed the Waboku. So they won't be able to protect themselves next turn. And we draw Delinquent Duo, which means this game is pretty much wrapped up. We're going to Delinquent Duo, getting rid of their entire hand here. It's a Waboku and a Mystical Space Typhoon, both of which would have been pretty useful at combating our play we're going to do here. We're going to Snatch Steal the Mechanical Chaser and attack in for everything. Now, if they don't have a way to deal with this next turn, then we just do win the following turn. We can normal summon out Cyberjar, try and get in for lethal that way. If they bring out a monster instead, we've got the Change of Heart for that. So really the only thing we're worried about here is if they've got like a Mystical Space Typhoon or Heavy. But even in that case, we're still in a pretty good position, as we can just Change of Heart their Mechanical Chaser on the following turn, and we'll still have a monster on field with our Mystic Tomato. So we're feeling very good about this situation. I can't really think of a good way that we lose unless they have a Raigeki or Dark Hole here. And it looks like they don't have anything here, so we are just going to summon out the Cyberjar. Delinquent Duo, the last card in their hand in case it's a Karibo or something. But that is going to be the end of the game here. So I think that game 1 showed how powerful a first turn Forceful Sentry can be. Just knowing what your opponent's got and being able to play around it can be super, super strong. And it also showed the strength of Snatch Steal, as Snatch Steal was able to let us take our opponent's monster and just attack in for a ton of damage and basically guarantee the game. Going into game 2, generally the common practice is to side out of some of your hand rips, as they're less useful, as you're not going first and you really want them in the deck for that first turn hand rip and potential knowledge. But I forget whether I did or not. If I did side them out, I probably put in some Man Your Bugs in their place, as that card is very good in this format, as I discussed in my guide. But we shall see going into this game here. We are going to go second, of course, and we just gotta hope that they don't have any good hand rips here. And they do have a Forceful Sentry, so they will be able to see our hand. We've got all monsters in a Snatch Steal, so it looks like they are just going to take the Snatch Steal, as, it doesn't really deal with anything else in our hand here. They're just going to set 2, pass back to us. We draw a Cyberjar, which we could set, but honestly, we're still pretty good on resources, so we might as well just go aggressive here. We're going to summon out Mechanical Chaser, attack into their set. It's a Sangan, so they're just going to search another Sangan here. And we're just going to pass back to them. They're going to set another pass back to us. We draw another monster, so we're just going to keep getting aggressive here. Bring out a Mystic Tomato. Try attacking in. If they've got Mirror Force, they've got Mirror Force, and it looks like they do have Mirror Force, so that is quite unfortunate. But luckily, we've got a ton more monsters in hand that we can hopefully bring out and keep the aggressive going in the future. They are going to summon out a Mystic Tomato, flip up a Sangan, attack in for 24 here. Kind of unfortunate, but not the worst thing in the world, until they Confiscation away our Cyberjar. That's really rough, as it would enable us to potentially clear away their Mystic Tomato without letting them get more aggressive here. We still got a fair amount of resources in hand, so it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's still kind of unfortunate. They're just going to set another pass back to us. We draw a Witch of the Black Forest, which is pretty decent. We're just going to bring out a Mechanical Chaser, though, and attack into Sangan. Maybe we should have brought out the Witch, as this would have gotten us a search the next turn after they attacked him with a Mystic Tomato. But this way they can't get over our Mechanical Chaser with their Mystic Tomato, so I think I prefer that instead. They're just going to search a Witch of the Black Forest with the Sangan, makes sense. We're going to pass back to them, and they're just going to Raigeki away our Mechanical Chasers, so that's another sign for maybe bringing out the Witch instead of it. But then again, if we'd brought out Witch instead, they would have saved the Raigeki for whatever we searched off the Witch, so not the worst thing in the world here, I guess, to bait the Raigeki with the Mechanical Chaser. We are dropping pretty low, though. We're down to 2,500 now. But we are just going to keep the aggressive going. We're going to summon out a Mystic Tomato, attack into their Witch, because hopefully this way we can fisher away their Mystic Tomato and prevent them from just special summoning out another monster to field. They will be able to get a Mechanical Chaser, which can beat over our Mystic Tomato. But I think we kind of had to do this, as this is the best way to stop the current defensive pressure they have on board right now. Now, there are many ways we do lose this situation here, but That is one of them. Yes, Snatch Steal, the Mystic Tomato, will in fact be the end of the game here, as they can just bring out Mechanical Chaser, attack in for 3250. So that was a bit of an interesting one. You know, we're not playing too many monsters in this deck, but we basically drew all monsters, and the one spell or trap that we did draw was sort of hand ripped away. I wouldn't say that we lost that game because of the hand rip, but we did sort of brick there majorly, which is very interesting to see, as you don't often brick that way in this format, playing this sort of deck. But game 3, this means that we'll be able to go first yet again, which is very good for us, as we just gotta hope that we draw into some good hand rips there. So if we weren't playing hand rips game 2, we're definitely playing them game 3. And we will go first, and let's hope we get something good here. We will draw 2 delinquent duos in the opening hand. That's actually insane. We can get them down to 1 card in hand if they're not playing Electric Snake here, so that's very nice. And we draw the Forceful Sentry, so this actually just gets rid of their entire hand turn 1. And this sort of thing can happen in this format, and it's basically impossible to recover from. So, kind of unfortunate, you know, not unfortunate for us because we basically win the game at this point, but it's an unfortunate feature of the format. You can sort of get mega sacked if your opponent just draws all the hand rips turn 1. And that does happen here. So we're going to activate Forceful, just see what they've got. They've got a hand of Waboku, Raigeki, Forceful, Heavy, and Cyberjar. So we got to think about what we'd be most okay with them drawing later in the game. And I think, honestly, if they're drawing it later in the game, Forceful Sentry is a bit less good for them. So we're just going to return the Forceful and leave everything else in their hand to be discarded away with these delinquent duos. So we will pay 2,000 here, but that's a well worth price to get rid of their entire hand and deprive them of any plays. We're just going to set a Mystic Tomato, set a Monster Reborn, pass back to them. I think this plays around pretty much anything that they could draw. If they draw a duo, then they'd only be able to get 1 card off of it. If they draw Forceful, then they only get the Cyberjar choice. If they draw Spell and Trap removal, we do lose the Reborn, but we can get in for a ton of damage with the Tomato. If they draw something like Raigeki or Darkhold, then we are able to revive the Mystic Tomato with the Reborn next turn. So all in all, I feel very, very confident about this. And they will just set 1 pass back to us. That's very nice for us. We're just going to flip up the Mystic Tomato, attack in. Honestly, we could probably just also summon out the Cyberjar here and attack in, just to get more damage on board. But it's not really necessary. And I think we want to save it just in case we do reach a point where we are at a disadvantaged position. So it's unlikely because we do now have the Fisher in hand as well. But we are just going to keep it in hand. We're going to attack in for 14. Main phase 2, pass back to them. This is playing a bit into duo. If they do have duo, then we lose the Jar and the Fisher. It's a bit rough. But it's unlikely that they have duo as they didn't use it last turn. Maybe that's because they wouldn't be getting as much value off of it. But honestly, I'm also not too torn up about duo if they do have it, as they drop down 1,000 more, and, you know, we are still in a very good position. They're going to bring out a Mystic Tomato of their own. It looks like we're just going to be crashing Mystic Tomatoes here. So we'll crash, and as a note, when this sort of interaction happens, the player who is not the turn player has to search first. So we will be searching out a Mystic Tomato here before they decide on what to bring out. So they will search out a Mystic Tomato of their own, crash into our Mystic Tomato. That's perfectly fine by us. We search out another Mystic Tomato here, and they're going to bring out a Mystic Tomato of their own. Looks like we're just going through all the Mystic Tomatoes in each of our decks. I'm personally fine with that. We've got a Reborn to bring one back later. And for the last monster we bring out, I'm just going to bring out a Witch of the Black Forest. They can probably get over this with something like a Cannon Soldier, but then we can search out like a Mechanical Chaser or something to get over it next turn. So they're going to bring out the Cannon Soldier indeed, attack into our Witch. We are going to take 3 there. We're going to search out another Witch, I guess because we have multiple ways to get over the Cannon Soldier with our Fisher and our Reborn. So we don't necessarily need a Mechanical Chaser in hand. And this way, if they do clear the Witch later, we'll be able to get another search. But it looks like there was actually a delinquent duo, so they will be able to get some value off of this. Unfortunately for them, you know, they don't have a way to stop us from dealing with that Cannon Soldier, as our Reborn that is set can deal with it. But they might hit something good here. They're going to hit the Witch, and we are actually going to discard the Cyberjar, as it's unlikely to be that useful in the coming turns. We draw a Magician of Faith, which is pretty nice. We're going to bring back a Mystic Tomato with the Monster Reborn, crash into their Cannon Soldier, and bring out a Sangan. So we'll be able to get in an additional attack, and also be able to search something if they do draw removal. Main two, we're actually going to set the Magician of Faith. If they do have Change of Heart, that's a bit rough for us, but there isn't really much good in their graveyard they can get back. Like if they get back Raigeki, we get a search off the Sangan. If they get back Heavy Storm, then, you know, we lose the Fisher, I guess, if we set it. But honestly, I'm fine with if they Change of Heart this. We're just going to set the Fisher, pass back to them. This plays around if they draw a hand rip. They're going to activate Dark Hole, so we don't get the Magician of Faith activation, but we do get a search off the Sangan, which is very nice. We're just going to search into the Sangan because if they do draw another form of removal, then we get an additional search off of it. So we're feeling pretty good about that. We're going to bring out the Sangan, attack in, and drop them down to 3,600. We'll pass back to them. We didn't feel the need to set the heavy as that plays into a heavy of their own. If they do have a hand rip, we're fine with them ripping the Heavy Storm as it's not really advantageous to use it on this board. And it looks like they don't got anything to do, so we're just going to attack them with the Sangan here. They'll take 1,000. We'll set the Magician of Faith. Again, there's nothing really in their graveyard that we really care about them getting back if they do Change of Heart it, so we're fine doing this play. And if we are able to get back something like the Reborn, that could just be the end of the game. So they're just going to pass back to us, and that will actually just be the end of the game. We will get back a Reborn with the Faith and Reborn out their Cannon Soldier just in case they've got like a Karibo or something. And that will be the end of the game. So I hope that that game shows how devastating the opening turns can be if your opponent draws all their hand rip cards. But I also hope that this game shows that even if your opponent does draw all the hand rip cards, there's still a lot of back and forth in these games. Yes, Ellie was very, very disadvantaged in Game 3 after we did that, but using up 3 spells to do that did also drop our hand size down a fair bit as well. So, you know, we were both playing pretty low resources. We did have the upper hand throughout that entire time because we could sort of play around what they could potentially draw. But it's still interesting to see that this game turned into a low resource game for both players as well. And I think that's where some of the appeal in this format lies. So many games turn into low resource games, and that can be really, really fun if you're interested in that sort of thing. So if you like that sort of gameplay, then definitely try out the format, even though it can have very toxic first turns like you saw in this third game here. But what do you think about these games? Do you think that the presence of the hand rips and the possibility of a first turn, like what happened in this final game here, just makes the format unplayable? Do you happen to also really like this sort of low resource gameplay and think it's actually a major draw of the format? Let me know down in the comments below. But until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off.